how's it going, guys? Welcome back to FortMight. Today for our EDH deck quick look, we're going to be looking at my Krenko Mob Boss deck. Now this deck was actually the first one I ever made, and I think it was a perfect first introduction to me. It taught me all the basics of a Goblin tribal and tribes and basically how to play a good EDH commander deck. And Krenko Mob Boss definitely fills in a lot of those itches and shows us how the game should be played. Anyone new getting into it, wanting to learn how to play Commander and not really want to spend a lot of money on that first Commander 100 card deck, I recommend Krenko Mob Boss as the first thing for you. Let's take a look at the Commander himself. So Krenko Mob Boss, a 4 mana, that's 2 generic and a red for a 3/3 Goblin Warrior. He comes in and he has this ability. You tap him and create X 1/1 red Goblin creature tokens, where X is the number of goblins you control. Simple. And usually the best cards in Magic are the ones that are just so simple you can exploit them infinitely sometimes. So Krenko Mob Boss, he's a simple dude. You tap him, and if he's the only one on the field, he'll make 1 goblin for you. But let's say he's on the field with just 1 goblin, and you tap him, well then what's going to happen is he'll count himself, and he'll count the token. So he'll make 2 more goblins for you, meaning you'll now have 3 goblin tokens. Then when you tap him again, he'll count himself and those 3 goblin tokens. That's 4. So he'll make 4 goblin tokens for you, meaning now you'll have a total of 3 plus 4, 7. Do it again, he'll make 8 goblins. So that would be 7 plus 8. You'll now have that many goblin tokens. You guys see there's a theme here. He's going to be giving us exponential growth on our creatures. Very fantastic card. And I know what you're thinking. You're like, well, that's all fine and good, and you'll make a lot of goblins fast, but you really can only use his effect once a turn because you tap him down for it. You're only half right. We have cards in this deck set aside to untap him, give him haste when he comes in, just ways to cheese out this effect and make as many tokens as possible, so that then we can just slam into our opponents with the literal ocean of screaming green goblins. This guy is fantastic. We're going to go into the deck now. Like I said, it's pretty budget too. There's going to be some cards that I obviously upgraded just for because it was one of my first and favorite decks. But you guys can easily make a good budget deck from just the basics. Let's take a look at our creatures. First off, with the CMC 1 creatures, we have the Torch Courier. He comes in, has haste, and you may sacrifice him to give another creature haste until the end of turn. Torch Courier is a great card to have, especially if Krenko comes in. You can kill your Torch Courier and give Krenko haste and have him start making tokens for you as soon as possible. We then have Goblin Motivator. Once again, tap it. Target creature gains haste until the end of turn, right? We want Krenko able to start making us tokens as soon as he enters, so we just fill the board with things to grant haste. An Impulsive Pilferer. Alright, 1 mana, 1/1. When it dies, create a treasure token. Treasure token, by the way, is an artifact that can be tapped for any mana. We're probably going to use it for red, though. We can also encore it from the graveyard, so we can bring it back. And we know that if we bring it back from the grave and it dies again, it'll make us more treasure. So Impulsive Pilferer, great card. This is now touching on another theme of the deck that we have, which is almost pseudo aristocrat, where we're just sacrificing our own useless goblin tokens, useless with a little asterisk on it, but we're sacrificing our goblins to get some sort of benefit from it. What kind of benefits? Well, we look at the next card. Our Prospector. You can sacrifice a goblin to create a red mana. So, if we go back to the Pilferer, when he dies, we'll sacrifice it for him to give us a red mana. And his death gives us a treasure, which we can then use for another red mana. So we're making a nice growth just from having a dude that can sacrifice goblins for us. The last card we have in our 1-drop slot is a Goblin Churjin. This is one of the older cards that I have here. Still relatively cheap though. A 1 mana 0/2. And you can sacrifice a different goblin to regenerate a creature. This is fantastic for if someone's trying to single target removal Krenko, right, with a destroy effect. We can get rid of one of our smaller tokens to make sure Krenko regenerates and doesn't die. A excellent card to just interrupt your opponent's attempts to remove our commander. Moving on to our 2-drops, right? CMC2, we have the Generator Servant. This is one of the few non-goblins we have in the deck. 2 mana, 2/1. You can sacrifice the Servant to add 2 generic to your mana pool. And if that mana is spent on a creature, that creature comes in with haste. This is a nice way to essentially bring in Krenko, maybe even on turn 3. Yeah, turn 3 is what I usually do it on average, right? We play the Generator turn 2, turn 3, we drop 1 more land, and we sacrifice the Generator to play Krenko, and we can now tap Krenko down instantly and start having us make tokens as quickly as possible. Speaking of making tokens as quickly as possible, we need more ways to get more goblins on the board. Krenko will reward us when we use his effect, and there's a lot of goblins on the board. So enter the Goblin Battle Cry Goblin, a 2/2 goblin for a generic and a red. Goblins you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until the end of turn. That's a way to make our Krenko start tapping fast. But Pack Tactics. Whenever this card attacks, if you attack with creatures with total power 6 or greater this combat, create a red goblin creature token that's tap and attacking. So, what this essentially says is if you are attacking with him, and let's say that's 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, him and 4 more goblins, he'll make another goblin to come in and help him. Just more ways of flooding the board as quickly as possible. We're going to flood the board even more with this creature, the Mog War Marshal. That is a 2 mana 1/1. When it comes into play or is put into the graveyard, put a 1/1 red goblin creature token into play. So he has this thing called Echo, meaning you have to pay its cost or sacrifice it. I believe it's your next upkeep. We're not going to pay it. We very rarely pay it because him coming in makes a goblin and him leaving the battlefield makes a goblin. So we're going to get 2 goblins from just him touching down on the board. Krenko, once again, will appreciate. Goblin Instigator. When it enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 goblin creature token, right? We have more people coming in with friends. Going into the Dark Dweller Oracle. Goblin Shaman, 2/2 for 1 generic. Sacrifice a creature, exile the top card of your library. You may pay that card this turn, or play that card this turn. You still pay its cost and all that stuff. Why do we have this? Well, we're going to get into that a little bit. I want you to always remember things that just say sacrifice a creature, meaning it doesn't care if it's a goblin or not. Those tend to come in useful later, right? So a pretty good card that helps us, once again, sacrificing our unnecessary creatures. And we get a little bit of a almost card advantage when we exile the top, because we might be able to use that card. We might not, but the main reason we're using it is because we want to sacrifice a creature. Now talking to one of the more expensive cards. This is an upgrade that I put in. Conspicuous Snoop, 2 mana 2/2 goblin. This guy says you may play with the top card of your library revealed. So meaning the top card of your library, just turn it face up so everyone could see it. You may cast goblin spells from the top of your library. And as long as the top card of your library is a goblin card, Conspicuous Snoop has all activated abilities of that card. Very good. This deck has a lot of activated abilities, ways to essentially tap, or if they have something, any sort of tap effect, going back to maybe this is the card on top of your library. Well, that means the Snoop will be able to tap itself to grant something haste, assuming, obviously, it doesn't have summoning sickness. You can also even just play with this card off the top because he lets you cast from the top. I really like this card, and obviously it's gone up a bit in price since I last got it, but still, there's a reason. One last card to go in our 2-drops, Goblin Recruiter. When Goblin Recruiter, it's a 1/1 Goblin, comes into play, search your library for any number of Goblin cards. Reveal those cards to all players. Shuffle your library, then put those revealed cards on top of your library in any order. This is great. Let's say you have mana, but you just don't have enough goblins to start making things happen. Well, with Goblin Recruiter, you can line up the next couple of cards perfectly so that they pop off, you draw, you know exactly what that creature is, you can play it, right? You are able to plan for the next goblins that you're going to draw into. Well, I really like Goblin Recruiter, an excellent 2-drop and addition to the deck. Moving on to the 3-drops, this is where you usually see the scariest creatures of the goblins start showing up. Kicking it off, Goblin King. Other goblins you control get +1/+1 and have Mountain Walk. Mountain Walk means that if your opponent, whoever you're going to be attacking into, has a mountain, then none of your goblins can be blocked. They kind of just sneak past the enemy lines. Goblin King, fantastic card. It makes our goblins stronger, and most times in a commander game, you'll probably be playing another red player against someone who uses red in their color identity. And they'll might have a mountain that can just make your goblins unblockable. Fantastic. Goblin Chain Whirler. 3 mana, 3/3. First strike. When Goblin Chain Whirler enters the battlefield, deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. It's essentially a one-sided ping to the enemy. A lot of really good cards. I'm talking like splicers and things like that for golems. All of their buffs, they're super strong cards, but they only have 1 health. Well, with Goblin Chain Whirler, when he comes in, he pops all those enemy lines, and anything with 1 health is going to die thanks to his effect. Really good card to have. Now we're getting into the Hobgoblin Bandit Lord, one of the newer ones. But once again, if it's a goblin, it's gotta get in here. Other goblins you control get +1/+1. It deals. You can use a 1 and 1 red mana to tap it. Deals damage equal to the number of goblins that entered the battlefield under your control this turn to any target. This is really good. Let's say we had Krenko going off a couple turns in the past. You have 5, 10, upwards of maybe 20 goblins on your side of the field. You're swinging out with those 20 goblins, right? And you tap him to deal another 20 damage. If your opponent can't stop this and just takes that 40 damage because of the 20 from the Hobgoblin, right? You had 20 goblins enter the battlefield this turn, and the other tokens are just swinging to the face. That's game right then and there for him. Bandit Lord, scary. Really scary card. Goblin Chieftain. Other goblins you control get +1/+1 and have haste. He also has haste. There's really nothing more we can say. That's one of the great things about the Krenko deck. It's easy, and it's easy to understand and easy to play with. Moving on into Goblin Matron. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a goblin card, reveal that card, and put it into your hand. It's a 1/1 only, but she fixes. Maybe you need a very specific goblin in your hand. Maybe you need that Goblin Chieftain, right? And this guy will definitely help you. Excuse me, she's a young lady. Moving on, we have a Rubble Fort. Now, once again, not one of those goblins, but he is very thematic because it's the base that the goblins live in. It's a 3 mana 0/3 with Defender and Reach, so it'll block those flying creatures that are coming at you. And creatures you control have haste, just a passive blanket effect for the board. It'll be great for all of our tokens that enter the battlefield. Goblin War Chief. Goblin spells you control cost 1 generic less to cast And goblins you control have haste. Another one of those haste buffers. A bit of redundancy in a commander deck is not really a bad thing, right? We want to have as many ways to grant haste as possible to our swarming army. Pashik Mons. Now this guy is not relatively cheap. I think his price did go down, which is great. But when he or another goblin you control dies, he deals 1 damage to any target. Remember those sacrifice outlets we were talking about earlier, right? Whenever we sacrifice something from now on, while he's on the field, he can deal 1 damage to any target. And for 4 mana, sacrifice a goblin to make 2 more goblins, right? So he just helps his own growth. The last 3-drop we got, the Goblin Sharpshooter. Goblin Sharpshooter doesn't untap during your untap step. Whenever a creature dies, untap Goblin Sharpshooter. Goblin Sharpshooter deals 1 damage to target creature or player. I know I'm talking very like dun dun dun, right? This guy is really good, right? You have him on the field, you have a sacrifice outlet and ways to generate goblins. It could be game right then and there. And I'll explain some of those sacrifice outlets when we get to them. But Goblin Sharpshooter, like, mwah, spaghetti. Fantastic. So the good news is we're already nearing the end of our creature base. We're moving into the 4-drops. And we're going to kick it off with the Beetleback Chief. This is a 4-mana 2/2. When it enters the battlefield, put 2 1/1 red goblins onto the battlefield. Not really much to say beyond that. Goblin Thrashmaster. This guy, or excuse me, Trashmaster. 3/3. Other goblins gain +1/+1 and sacrifice a goblin to destroy target artifact. This is really good. We don't really have a lot of I call it back row destruction, but destroying your opponent's artifacts or enchantments. We don't have too much of that in here. So Goblin Thrashmaster kind of scratches that itch and solves that problem for us. The last 4-drop we got, Zada Hedron Grinder. This is one of those cards that I put in just because I really wanted all goblins. Every legendary goblin I could find, I wanted it in the deck. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, and we have a pretty good amount, that targets only Zada, copy that spell for each other creature you control that the spell could target. Each copy targets a different one of those creatures. So essentially, let's say you, you know what? I have a spell right here. Let me help. Let me use this as an example. There we go. Reckless Charge. Spoiler for the sorcery. But Reckless Charge, we have maybe, let's say, 10 goblins on the field. But we cast Reckless Charge on Zada. Reckless Charge gives us +3 and haste on Zada. Zada says, oh, let me multiply that for all my other goblins. So all other goblins now will get that spell casted on them, meaning all other goblins will get +3 and haste. That's the sort of thing Zada's putting out. Really good, and has a very specific scary combo when we start getting to the sorceries. Finishing it off with our CMC 5s, we have the Siege Gang Commander. When it enters the battlefield, put 3 goblin tokens on the battlefield, and for 2 mana, that's a generic and a red, sacrifice a goblin. Siege Gang Commander deals 2 damage to any creature or player. Not much to say beyond that. Our non-sacrifice outlet, we don't really play Snowlands. That's what that symbol is, Snowlands. But his other effect is just good all the same. 5 mana 4/3. Thermopod. It's a slug. Thermopod gains haste on the end of turn if one of the manas was, or you can use a snow mana to give it haste. But the other effect is what we're looking for. Sacrifice a creature. Add red to your mana pool. Just sacrifice any creature. Can't complain. Alright, so that is almost all of the creatures. We have one more to show off. This one took me some reading to understand him. It's simple, but it took me a minute. So, Goblin Dark Dwellers. 5 mana 4/4 with Menace. When Goblin Dark Dwellers enters the battlefield, you may cast target instant or sorcery card with converted mana cost 3 or less from your graveyard without paying its cost. If that card would be put into the graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Now, when I first started playing, I couldn't understand that. But let's go back to our good old-fashioned, where's that spell I just had? It's gone. Ah, here we go. Reckless Charge. We used that Reckless Charge earlier. Remember, it was on Zada. But now we're going to play Goblin Dark Dweller. That allows us to pull out that Reckless Charge from the graveyard and cast it. Since it has less than 3 converted mana cost, we can cast it from our graveyard. Who are we going to target? Well, if we still have that Zada on the field, we should target Zada with this, because then everyone else gets this. This is a really good card, and it comes with some surprising plays when people aren't looking. That's it, though, for our creature base. Not a lot of creatures, but really, when it comes to Krenko, we don't need a lot of creatures, because he's going to make them for us. He's going to swarm the board on our behalf. All right, now let's move into the artifacts, and then enchantments, spells, which we have the most of, and then we'll finish off with the lands. All right, moving on to the artifacts. We don't have a lot of artifacts, and I'm going to separate it from enchantments, because our enchantments are really important. Kicking it off, we have a Culling Dais. It is a 2-mana artifact. Sacrifice a creature, put a charge counter on Culling Dais. And for 1 mana, you can just draw a card for each charge counter on Culling Dais, right? But you'd have to obviously sacrifice Culling Dais. We don't really use it for the card draw unless we're really backed into a corner. What we really use it for is just to tap it and sacrifice a creature, which we'll explain why in a bit. Mage Right Stone. 1 mana, tap it, untap target creature that has an activated ability with tapped in its cost. Are you telling me for 1 mana I can tap him or tap this card and untap my Krenko? That means I can use him again that exact same turn, right? So now, let's say it's just Krenko. We use Krenko's effect, he makes 1 goblin. Then we use this, like we said, we're now making 2 more goblins, right? We'll have him and 3 goblins on the field just in 1 turn thanks to this card, Mage Right Stone. Hazoret's Monument. Red creatures you control cost 1 less to cast. Great, we can always use a little reduction in our costs of our creatures. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. There may be some times where you feel like you're getting flooded with the lands or something you don't like, and that monument will be very useful. I highly recommend it, just keeping an eye on it. I don't see it explode in usefulness all the time. It's always nice to have it reduce the cost of our creature spells, especially if you're playing against a group that knows what Krenko is capable of and just keeps destroying him on sight. That commander cost, that commander tax, is going to add up real fast. And using this to help reduce that cost even a little bit would help us in the long run. Now that was it for all of our artifacts. Now we get into the real nitty-gritty of it, the important stuff. Enchantments. We have a lot of these. Relative. Let's kick it off with Siege. Outpost Siege. When it enters the battlefield, choose Khans or Dragons. Who do you support? If you choose the Khans at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of your library, and until the end of turn, you may play that card. Or if you choose Dragons, whenever a creature you control leaves the battlefield, this card deals 1 damage to target creature or player. You almost always choose the Dragons, right? You're a Goblin deck. You support your Dragon Overlords. This is also useful because whenever one of your creatures leave the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. Let's say you have this on the field, you have 20 or so goblins, and then your opponent board wipes, kills all the goblins on the field. Well, now you have 20 damage that you can divide up along your opponents. This is an excellent card to have. We're going on to Makeshift Munitions. It has a monkey goblin on it, and I consider him a goblin. He's a 2-mana enchantment. Sacrifice an artifact or creature to deal 1 damage to any target. Another sacrifice outlet, always good in this deck. Bogart Shenanigans, right? Bogart Shenanigans, 3 mana. Whenever another goblin you control is put into the graveyard from play, Bogart Shenanigans deals 1 damage to target player. Oh, look at that. More ways to deal damage when we lose our creatures. It's almost like a theme is coming together. We have Hammer of Perforos. Creatures you control have haste, and for 3 mana you can sacrifice a land to make a golem. Meh. Pretty good. Pretty good. Not going to complain. Not going to say anything. You want it. Just for the haste. Speaking of haste, we have Fever. Or Fervor. There you go. 3 mana. Creatures you control have haste. Cool. And now we're here for these two. These are almost the linchpins of your deck. Scary and game-winning if you have them on the board. First up, Impact Tremors. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, deals 1 damage to each opponent. Remember that exponential growth that we started with in the beginning? Well, you have 1 goblin, then you have 2 goblins, then you have this, then that, then that. Well, whenever you get more goblins, you're dealing 1 damage with Impact Tremors. That can end the game almost. Let's say you have something simple. Let's say you have like 7 goblins on the board. Plus Krenko, that means 8. You tap Krenko, and you are going to make more goblins. Those goblins, those 8 more goblins, are going to deal 8 damage thanks to Impact Tremors. And that is going to be a problem for your opponent. Fast damage, it's going to hit him hard, it'll hit him fast, and it's to each opponent. So if you're playing a commander game of 3-4 other opponents, this is going to hurt all of them equally. The last card for our enchantments, and this one, right? I don't have a thing called a golden pig, thanks to Commander's Quarters. I don't have that, but this is the mightiest card. Let's call it that. Goblin Bombardment. Sacrifice a creature. Goblin Bombardment deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So this could potentially end things just right here and there. If you have a good amount of goblins on board, anything your opponent plays creature-wise can instantly be destroyed by Goblin Bombardment if it can be targeted, right? Assuming you have the goblins to kill it, right? Let's say your opponent plays, I don't know, a 5/5, and you happen to have 6 goblins on board. Well, you know what? As soon as that creature ETBs enters the battlefield, we're going to sacrifice 5 goblins and kill him outright, right? We don't care. We don't want him to have any presence. Goblin Bombardment is disgusting in the good way, right? I highly recommend it. The last card that I'll go for with our enchantments is an Enchantment Aura, and this goes into our last strategy that kind of just puts a bow on the Krenko destructive nature of his deck. Frenzied Fugue. Enchantment Aura. Enchant a permanent. When it enters the battlefield or at the beginning of your upkeep, gain control of that permanent until the end of turn. Untap that permanent. It gains haste until the end of turn. So, with this card, and this, like I said, this ties into the last aspect of our Krenko deck. We can put this on Krenko to obviously untap him and allow us to tap him again for more effects. Or we can put this on our opponent's creatures and take them. Now, I hear what you're saying. Well, what are we going to do with those opponent's creatures? They're going to be ours for the turn, but then it goes back to our opponent, right? Yeah, unless we have a sacrifice outlet on the board that just kills it off. We're stealing our opponent's creatures and using them as ammunition to shoot him in the face. And that is the last aspect of this Krenko deck. The last, I would almost call it the last unfair part of it. That's like, you have a presence, but I'm going to take your presence from you and use it to kill you. This is a really good card, and you're going to see a lot of these thematic themes, this effect, pop up when we move into our sorceries and instants. Before we finish off with the lands, sorceries and instants, There's that reckless charge I keep using in our demonstrations earlier. 1 mana, target creature gains +3 and gains haste. That's great. We can also flash it back from our graveyard for 3 mana, meaning we can cast it from our graveyard if we need a creature to have haste right here and now. Renegade Tactics. Target creature can't block this turn. Draw a card. We really use it just for the card draw. It's a great card draw aspect. But maybe your opponent has a big, heavy, chunky body, and we need a way just to finish out the game. Well, we can make it so that he can't attack that turn. Goblin War Strike. Goblin War Strike deals damage equal to the number of goblins you control to target player. If you have a lot of goblins, which if you play this deck right, you should, you can end the game here and now with that. You can end one player while the rest of your horde kills the other, right? This is a super scary, destructive card. Bright Stone Ritual. 1 mana. Add 1 mana to your mana pool for each goblin in play. Do you want infinite mana for a turn? Because you can have seemingly infinite mana if you have enough goblins on the board. Faithless Looting. We need some card draw sometimes. Draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards, and we can flash it back for 3. This is just a 1 red sorcery. Really good card. We just need things to help us. What's that? You need more haste? We have Expedite. 1 red mana, target creature gains haste, and you draw a card. Moving to our 2s, we have Krenko's Command. Put 2 goblin creature tokens on the battlefield. Awesome. Thrill of Possibility. 2 mana. As an additional cost to this spell, discard a card, then draw 2 cards. Great. Fantastic. Goblin Fodder. Make more goblins. For 2 mana, make 2 red goblins. Cool. Great. Moving into Battle Hymn, though. 2 mana. Add red to your mana pool for each creature you control. A lot of mana. Great. Awesome. Scary. And now, this was the part that I was semi-rushing towards. I want to talk about the theft effects of this deck. We have a lot of theft effects. Almost a scary amount. Let's kick it off. Wrangle. Gain control of target creature so long as its power is 4 or less for the turn. Untap that creature and it gains haste. Once again, we can use this as Krenko to activate his ability multiple times in a turn, or we can steal our opponent's stuff. Act of Treason. Gain control of target creature. Untap it and give it haste. Harnessed by Force. Gain control of any number of target creatures until the end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain haste until the end of turn. You're really only targeting 1 creature with this, but let's say you have the mana left over thanks to your mana creation cards. You can strive it to target multiple creatures. Besmirch. Until the end of turn, gain control of target creature. Untap it and goad it. Goading just means it can't attack you, which doesn't really matter if you're gaining control of it. But great card. Once again, another theft. Hijack. Gain control of target artifact or creature until the end of turn. Untap it. Give it haste. Threaten. Untap target creature and gain control of it until the end of turn. Yes, it gains haste. You guys are seeing a theme here, right? Mark of Mutiny. Gain control of target creature until the end of turn. Give it a counter. Untap it. Give it haste. Like Treacherous Blood. Gain control of target creature until the end of turn. Untap it. It gains trample and haste until the end of turn. Sweet Jesus. We have Marzi Kev's Expertise. 3 mana. Gain control of target creature or vehicle until the end of turn. Untap it. It gains haste. You may also cast a card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your hand without paying its cost. So any 2-drop creatures that you got, CMC 2 cost cards, you can also play it for free thanks to this. Great card. So that is the theft aspect of it. Scary stuff. Really, really scary stuff. Finishing it off with a Heat Shimmer. Put a token into play that's a copy of the target creature. It gains haste and at the end of the turn, remove this permanent from the game. We really only have this card for that Zada earlier. because it just doubles our entire board. Let's say we have 5 goblins on the field and Zada. You cast Heat Shimmer on Zada, and she'll cast a copy of this onto all of our creatures. This will then make 5. That'll make 5 more goblins for us, and another Zada, who unfortunately dies because of the legend rule. But we now essentially double up our board of goblins. Really good card, and has some deceptive, like, explosive turns if you use it right. Our other finishing off spells that we got here. Massive Raid. Massive Raid deals damage to any creature or player equal to the number of creatures you control. If you played Krenko right, that should be game ending. Hoarding Outburst. Speaking of goblins, we make 3 more for this 3-drop. Goblin War Party. Now we can choose one with this card. Create 3 goblins, or creatures you control get +1/+1 and haste until the end of turn. It's a 4 mana normally. We can entwine it for 3 and make sure both of those effects go off. Most times we really only need one or the other to cinch out the game. Empty the Warrens. Put 2 red goblin creature tokens on the battlefield. And if you cast any spells before this, you storm it. Meaning you copy this card for every spell you cast before this turn. If you got a lot of cards that you played earlier and you finish off with Empty the Warrens, you're going to have a lot of goblins. Goblin Rally. Create 4 1/1 red goblin creature tokens. For 5 mana, that's okay. The last card we have for our sorceries and instants, and the last non-land card in the deck, Burn at the Stake. 3 for 5 mana, 3 red. As an additional cost to cast Burn at the Stake, tap any number of untapped creatures you control. Burn at the Stake deals damage to target creature or player equal to 3 times, that's 3x, the number of creatures tapped this way. I had to use this card to beat someone who I've used it twice to win out the game, where one player had just he had a pillow fort sort of strategy where I'd have to spend too much mana to attack and swarm him with my goblins. Well, Burn at the Stake kind of got around that for me without having to have my creatures attacked. I also won using this card with a health gain deck, a life gain deck, who had ridiculous amounts of life. I had a good amount of creatures though, so I tapped them all down and dealt 3 times as much damage as each creature would be able to do, my 1/1s, right? So Burn at the Stake is a very good card to have as well. That cinches out the whole deck. We're going to take a look at the lands now, which, unsurprising, is nothing to really blink at. It's very simple. We are running 34 lands in this deck, and one of it's non-basic. Only one. Den of the Bugbear. If you control 2 or more lands, it enters the battlefield tapped. So you want to play this early to have the full effect of it. You can tap it for a red, or for 4 mana, you can turn it into a 3/2 red goblin with, whenever it attacks, create a red goblin that's tapped and attacking. So it's a pretty good card just because it's a goblin on a land that we can use to buff Krenko when he enters. So nothing big to talk about there. Every other card in the deck, right, every other land is a mountain, right? We have non-stop mountains, very basic, right? Could you theoretically throw in some non-basic lands? Yeah, definitely. I could foresee ways to buff your mana base, but like I said, this is pseudo budget, so most of these lands are going to be cheap and easy. Let's finish off with our closing thoughts and leave us with that. So, what can be said about Krenko Mob Boss that hasn't been said already? If you are a new player to EDH, right, Commander, Krenko is an excellent first deck to pick up. Highly recommended, simple to learn, easy to pick up, easy to play. I've had multiple new players walk up to our table and want to play, but they don't know where to begin, they don't know how to start, and I hand them a Krenko deck, and they smash all of our experienced players on the board, right? Because Krenko is that easy to just overwhelm and start breaking down. Are there upgrades that you can add to this? Most definitely. Are there ways you can even make this deck better? 100%. But if you're looking for a basic look at a Krenko Mob Boss deck, this is the one for you. Obviously, I'll have a list to the deck list in the description. I'll probably even try to pin it to our comments to see how that looks. Thanks so much for checking me out. Give us a like, comment, subscribe, all that beautiful stuff, and have a great day.